So it's been a shitty week in Ireland, on the island of Ireland. There was a high-profile rape trial where three fairly famous rugby players were accused of raping a 19-year-old girl, and the trial went on laboriously for a long time, quite publicly, and the three lads were cleared not guilty. And this elicited a furious reaction from the people of Ireland, who did not agree with that verdict. And a lot of people were tweeting at me going, "Blindboy, what is your hot take on the Belfast rape trial?" And I don't have a fucking hot take on the Belfast rape trial, because you're not supposed to have hot takes on something as collectively traumatic and painful as that. I've spoken about my, we'll say, the male privilege before when it comes to sexual assault. Sexual assault is not on my radar. I never have to worry about sexual assault. I can go jogging at 3 a.m. and it doesn't even enter my head, because it is highly unlikely as a male that I'm going to be a victim of it. So that's because of that privilege. When something like that verdict came out and the reaction to it, no matter how angry I was and how furious I was, I chose to use that time to listen to women and take on board what they're saying about it, and for me to fucking chill out. Because sometimes when you come from a position of privilege and you comment on something like that, especially if it's a hot take, your best intentions can be offensive and hurtful at a time when emotions are fucking high. So that's one reason I didn't comment on it. The second reason I didn't comment on it, and I was going to, is because the reaction online from some lads, a particular type of lad, they were the type of lad who only set up a Twitter account just so they could say nasty things to their favourite footballer if they fucked up in a game or whatever. There was a particular type of young sports lad who turned Twitter into a fucking sewer for a week, and a gang of them deliberately sought out any woman who was expressing her distaste with the verdict and using quite aggressive, slut-shaming, victim-blaming language at these women. So I knew if I, with my 170,000 followers, tweeted something about it, I would just draw these fucking shithead sewer bastards on. They would spew gogs out of their mouths, and then the huge amount of women that follow me on Twitter would have more sewer in their feeds. So that was another reason I sat back and listened. What I did tweet, because I felt it was constructive and fucking useful, was a link for people to donate money to Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and Midwest Rape Crisis Centre. I would urge you now, please, donate fucking money to your local Rape Crisis Centre, because they need that fucking money, and I tell you why. In Ireland, only 1 in 10 rapes are actually reported. Out of that 1 in 10, only 1 to 2% end up in an actual conviction, right? That's disgraceful. Something is wrong with the system. Something's very wrong with the system. And I don't just think it's Ireland. It's a worldwide thing. That's why Me Too exists. Because the system is not representing women correctly. The conversation around it then quickly turned to, because as well it's worth noting that the accused in the trial then started threatening legal action against the people of Twitter who disagreed with the verdict. So the conversation moved away from the verdict and onto the WhatsApp messages that the accused had been sending each other the morning after the night of the allegation. And people were speaking about the misogyny of the language that they used and the objectification of the girl in question, all this type of stuff. And a lot of people were shocked by it. A lot of lads were shocked by it in particular. And I have to say, I wasn't fucking shocked by it. Because I grew up in that fucking culture. That's just how lads speak about fucking women. It's normal. And I'm not for 1 second trying to make excuses for that type of discourse. But what I'm saying is that it's a horrible thing that is normal. Like, when I saw the WhatsApp messages, and when I saw, we'll say, the misogynistic comments coming from those sports lads, as in the Twitter sports lads, with the lads who were being pricks, not the rugby player, not the accused lads, just the general Twitter ball boys. When I saw the language they were using, it made me kind of reflect on just like how the culture I was raised in as an Irish lad who hung around with other Irish lads, and the discourse of objectification and misogynism that was completely normalised from my fucking childhood up until my early 20s. And like, I was never taught about fucking consent in school. I was given very basic sex education by a priest, and the gist of that sex education was, when a man and a woman love each other, they get married and they have sex and don't wank. And that was it. No use of the word consent or what that would mean. Sex was not spoken about with my parents because they came from old school Catholic background, so parents don't want to talk to their kid about sex. And if you want to say consent, that means talking about sex, and you don't do that in an Irish Catholic household, even though my parents weren't Catholic, but they came from that tradition and culture, if you get me. And I grew up to believe that a rapist, and most lads in Ireland grew up to believe, a rapist is somebody, a fucking boogeyman creep who hangs around the alleyways and has a dirty jacket and a big long beard and a haggard face and looks like a monster. And these rapists jump out of alleyways and violently, physically attack women and force sex upon them. That is the definition of rapist that I grew up with. I was not brought up to believe that a rapist could be an accountant or a bank manager or a bread delivery man or my next door neighbour. I was not brought up to believe that rape is something that happens in bedrooms with a woman who previously consents and then decides that she doesn't want to go further. This was never part of the discourse I grew up with. And it made me just really reflect on the first kind of sexual interaction you have with girls as a young Irish lad. It's in about second year of secondary school. You go to teenage discos. And you go to these teenage discos. You're first of all, you're in an exclusively male group, right? You go to the teenage disco, then you try and shift as many girls as possible, and then the next day you're with the lads, and the conversation is, how many did you shift? Then, what did you get off her? Did you get tit? Did you finger her? Did you feel her arse? Did she wank you? That's the only conversation, right? Then that moves on to what I call smell my finger culture, where if a lad did say, oh, I fingered her, he would have to offer his hand to all the other lads, and they would try and smell it to see whether or not he in fact did. And this was completely fucking normal. Not only was it normal, it was this is how social relations are made in groups of young lads. One thing that's fucking hugely important to young lads is status within a group, okay? And two things got you status. Whether you were brilliant at fighting or you were class at getting loads of girls. Those two things. If you weren't great at getting loads of girls but you could kick everyone's head in, you had high status. Vice versa. So discourse becomes about how many girls can you get, what can you get off them, how soon do you think you are to finally actually losing your virginity. The two biggest insults I grew up with were, you are gay, you are a virgin. That's the two things. Now, the other thing too is that it's rooted in very low self-esteem. Lads want to... Another huge insult, a massive insult actually, was being called a frigid. And this was really fucking shitty because lads develop at different levels. So some lads who are late bloomers will say they don't have their pubes yet. They might not fucking have had a wet dream. They might not even be getting erections. That can happen some lads at maybe 15, while other lads it'll happen at 11. So for the ones who actually weren't physically sexually developed, they too were being forced into shifting girls and really not wanting to do it because they're not sexually mature enough to have an actual interest in it. So if you didn't, you were called a frigid. So if you are gay or being called a frigid, bad insults. Now this is a difficult conversation because I do not want to come across as if I'm being sympathetic or trying to portray this as with sympathy. I'm not. What I'm trying to do is explain the complexity of a toxic culture from my experience of being fucking raised in it, and to investigate that complexity as a means of understanding its motivations, and then moving towards a conversation whereby we can tackle it. Because that's the smart thing to do, you know? It's still fucking toxic and men are still trash. I just want to talk about the inside of the dustbin and how things end up inside in that dustbin and why it stinks so bad. Another reason that young lads in my group, and myself included, would speak about women or speak about girls in a misogynistic way, it's a fear. When you're 15, 16, 17, no, not 17, 15, 16, and you are meeting a girl or whatever, and you go back to the lads and you say, oh, I'm meeting this girl, I'm shifting her, whatever, I really like her, she's a good friend, I laugh around her, she makes me really happy, when I'm not around her I really miss her, I think I love her. If you said that, you got a box into the fucking head, and you were jeered and slagged and bullied and called gay for daring to have feelings for a girl, because girls are objects and they are merely vessels for you to get things off. That's the other thing. I was within that culture. Girls, you're kind of... Lads at that age are led to believe girls don't actually want sex or enjoy it. Sex is something a girl has, okay? And it must be coerced out of them. It has to be tricked, coerced, or pleaded out of them. That sex is the thing that a girl holds and she has to hold on to it very tightly, or else she's called a slut. And then the lad then, like a game, has to figure out a way to get that off her, and she's not going to enjoy it, because girls don't enjoy sex. It's something they have, and they reluctantly have to give it away. But another key behind the psychology of it is, one part of it is trying to be hard and trying to show off and trying to maintain status within your group, whereby the signifier of status is how horrible you can talk about a woman. The other thing is, it's a person with low self-esteem, right? A young man with low self-esteem, and the utter fear of rejection. If you're with a girl and all she is you're getting tit off her, or you're shifting her, or you're only with her so that you can eventually get the ride, right? If all she is that, if she turns around and doesn't like you, or God forbid chooses someone else, you never have to feel true, hurtful rejection that confirms in you your low opinion of yourself. So that's the other misogynistic language and a misogynistic way of thinking. It's a great tool to prevent yourself from being truly, truly vulnerable, from having the maturity to give yourself over emotionally to another person and lay that bare and allow that to be hurt. Okay? That's where a lot of that kind of comes from. In my opinion, as a male, and having been in these groups, having grown up with it, and that style of discourse and that situation where young men are getting self-worth and social currency from objectifying and dehumanizing women, that is the foundational rock, right? That is one of the foundational stones of sexual assault happening in the first place, and also the justice system that doesn't seem to take sexual assault seriously and places the onus on the victim. So that's the root, that's the bud of the situation. And I grew up with it. I grew up right in the fucking middle of it. And that's why I don't want to be like on my fucking high horse about the bloody issue. Because it's like, okay, now I'm a grown adult man with maturity, and all I've learned to do, I'm base level misogynistic and toxic at my base level. My initial responses to things, because that's what I grew up with. But over the years, through my own self-development, my mental health development, compassion and empathy, when compassion, empathy, things like that become the focus of your life and in your own happiness, then I kind of gradually try and challenge that behaviour in myself and in other fucking lads. Like I said, I'm a fucking adult now. If I hear another lad talking like that around me, I'm just going to go, why are you saying that, man? That sounds very insecure. Why do you need to speak that way about another person to dehumanise them? Are you not embarrassed? Not a fucking hope was I saying that when I was 16. I wouldn't have had the courage, and I wouldn't have identified the other person's comments as being bad. I would have seen it as crack and banter and a mad laugh, because it had been 100% normalised. And lads out there listening going, oh, I never did that. Fuck off. Yeah, you did. If you went to school, if you hung around with lads, that's the way it was. That's what the Yanks call locker room talk. And take ownership of it. And try and fucking change it in yourself and realise, look, yeah, I grew up thinking this way and speaking this way. Now I'm an adult, I have a choice, I can challenge it. And I can challenge it in other people. And fucking hell, if you're a grown man and you've got a younger brother, now is the time to have a fucking decent chat around that stuff. Do you know what I mean? ask him straight up, do you ever notice when you say that you fingered a girl or put your hand up her top, that all the other lads like laugh and give you, it feels good, and all the other lads seem to give you approval? And then he'll go, yeah, and then talk about it. Then go, do you think that's a great way to be getting approval? Are there different ways for you to get approval? Is there approval important to you if that those are the stakes? And speak to that young lad in terms of an internal locus of evaluation, which is, that's quite a fucking complex thing for an adolescent who isn't supposed to have a concrete sense of self. But simply, I am better than nobody else. Nobody else is better than me. Because you cannot evaluate humans off each other. And make that the mantra. Instead of fucking talking about hand jobs, so the lads will give him a high five and he gets to feel good for a little bit and then feel like shit later on. If you are one of the lads who's like, yeah, that trial didn't really interest me too much, found it a bit boring, don't really care, it doesn't really affect me. Well, sometimes art has a way of transcending, we'll say, the news and politics, and communicating in a much more powerful way. So for you, I would strongly advise that you read a book by the brilliant Irish author called Louise O'Neill, and she wrote a book called Asking for It, which is a very similar story to what's in the news, not far off it. Please read that book. It's a great book, and it will allow you to emotionally engage better through the medium of art, because sometimes not everybody can empathise with the news, And if you're a grown man, and when you meet other grown men, and the basis of your banter and crack, no matter how light-hearted you think it is, if the basis of that crack is misogynistic type chat, maybe have a talk about it between yourselves and ask yourself, is there other avenues of crack? Are there other potential crack avenues? Because the system, like I said, the legal system is currently unjust. The social system is unjust. This is an issue. And your slight crack and banter may be contributing to it, even though that might sound silly to you. Give that a lash. Give that a go. And to the lads who were fucking furious about last week, I felt embarrassed to look Irish women into the fucking eye last week. I felt really fucking shit. Remember, Repeal the fucking 8th is around the corner. So please register to fucking vote. Get out there and vote to repeal the 8th. Okay? Because here's the thing with repeal the 8th. If you disagree with the 8th Amendment being repealed, you're not anti-abortion, you're anti-safe abortion. Abortions are going to happen anyway. They are happening. But the women who are getting these abortions are doing it in a fashion that puts their life at risk and is inhumane. So please vote to fucking repeal the 8th. And lads who want to get involved in the Repeal the 8th campaign, the Limerick Repeal group are in desperate need of male volunteers, right? And on the 11th of April, in the Absolute Hotel at 7 o'clock, there is a meeting specifically for men in Limerick who want to get involved in canvassing for the repeal the 8th, for the repealing of the 8th Amendment, right? 7 o'clock, Absolute Hotel, 11th of April, which is next week. And what that talk is going to be, it will be, first of all, initiating you if you want to canvass door to door, because that's going to be very important. And it'll be kind of giving you a decent, solid information that will equip you for canvassing in favour of the repeal of the 8th Amendment. So please consider that if you are a man in Limerick, because they could use some lads helping out there. Eart. Gotta say, I was very disappointed that more high profile sports people didn't come out and voice a few opinions in the wake of that trial, because those lads would listen to them sports type fellas. I can't reach those lads with the Twitter profiles. They don't listen to me. They think I'm an SJW cuck, but they would listen to high profile sports lads. Here's some slightly good news. The Minister for Justice, Charlie Flanagan, is to review the legal protection offered to complainants in sexual assault cases in the wake of the Belfast trial, which is a good thing. I will believe it when I see it, Charlie, but it's a good thing that he's concerned about it, at least.